Hi and welcome to another episode of the award-winning Homeowners Q&A podcast. I'm your host Mars, and today we're taking a look at the impact of insulation on heat pump system sizing and the debate of fabric first versus fabric fifth. Joining me are Rhiannon de Wreede from Warmer, Natasha Ackroyd from Eon Next, Richard Burrows from Pirate Heating Supplies, Danny Murphy from Eco Trades, and Graeme Ross from Greystone Energy. Welcome everybody. Before we get started, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Eon Next. Eon Next has been helping UK homeowners make the switch to renewable energy and sustainable heating for years, offering advice, trusted installations, and ongoing support to help households. Whether you're exploring air source heat pumps, looking to optimize your home's efficiency, or just beginning your renewable journey, Eon Next team are there to make the process simple, transparent, and tailored to your home. A big thank you once again to Eon Next for supporting this podcast and for helping drive the UK's renewable heating revolution. Right, Rich, do you want to kick us off today? In terms of talking about the basics, what does fabric first actually mean in the context of heat pumps?
So fabric first approach is when you actually insulate the building to a high standard first of all before actually sizing your heat pump. Some of the issues you have is if you go ahead, do a heat loss calculation, put the heat pump in, and then do fabric second or fifth or fourth or wherever you want to do it in the journey, actually you end up with a heat pump that's massively oversized for the actual property. And when you do that, the bad side of heat pumps is that if you oversize them too much, they don't modulate very much. So you do actually need to start with a heat pump that's correctly sized for the building first, because the modulation range of that heat pump is greatly reduced if you size it first and then insulate afterwards. So it's always a really good idea to do as much as you can on the insulation side first in your property before putting your heat pump in. Or in my opinion, it is anyway. And certainly the approach that we kind of took with our building was when I built it. So it's a long time ago now. So it's 2012. So it's longer than I'd like it to be. But when we built our house, we insulated it actually past the standard of the design at the time. So 2010, we actually had the design done 2009. So actually it was 2010 building regulations. But we exceeded that amount by quite a considerable way. So where we only had like 85 stud walls that were 85, actually we insulated beyond that. So we actually put insulation on top of the stud walls as well to increase increase the values, which actually gave us a house, which actually I think our heat loss most of the time is about 3 kilowatts for a 250 square meter house, which isn't too shabby really. Just goes to show the fact that if you look at that side first, then that's really important to do that, especially on new build properties, or if you're doing retrofits and you're actually doing a whole house renovation. Really important to get the values up first before even considering doing a heat loss and then putting a heat pump in.
Rhiannon, where do you sit on the whole debate? First or fifth or 10th?
I edge towards it can happen later. It's really tricky, Rich, because you're not wrong, but I think that is in an ideal world, that is in an ideal situation. I think having that decision paralysis on when people want to improve their home, or maybe when they want to get a heat pump, or if sort of the heating is starting to pack up, and or that room's never been warm enough and now I'm actually considering it. I think that adding a kind of proviso, like you have to get your house up to spec first, all of a sudden, all of those different decisions, you've got to not only decide what kind of insulation you're going to have, who's going to do it, when is it going to happen, and then that's all happening before you then get your heat pump spec'd and having to go down that whole journey. I've got cavity wall, but I've not got cavity wall insulation. I decided that I wanted to get the heat pump in. That was, a call that we made. I don't know if we will get cavity wall insulation. We've got a fairly driving rain on one of the walls, and it just feels like a risky thing to potentially do in this property. In an ideal world, it would be lovely if we could all pay and get our houses up to spec first. It depends what you're, as a general UK-wide, we want to reduce our emissions, we want to try and cut carbon. The quickest way to do that is electrification. If we add a potentially complex step before that, we're slowing everything up. So a lot of research has been done on what difference insulation can make, especially looking at gas use. And actually human behaviour pretty much nullified any reduction in gas use for heating. And I just think we need to move quicker, and having that as an extra step can slow it all down.
I agree wholeheartedly with you, Rhiannon. And I think for me, there's the massive opportunity cost in going fabric versus fabric first versus fabric fifth. 80 to 85% of boilers that are installed are distressed purchases. If your house isn't working because your boiler's broken, you're not going to do a massive amount of work on your house before you get the heat pump. And then if you've lost that customer today, they're lost for 10 years. So I completely agree with what you said, Rhiannon and Rich. It's important. It's so important to make sure that customers have the experience and get the value out of a heat pump. But you've really got to think about that customer journey. And the fact of the matter for most people, when they're getting a new boiler, is their old one's broken. It's a real big risk for us as an industry and as a country, right? We're trying to do our thing. All of us work in this industry and feel so passionately about it. And the minute somebody gets a gas boiler instead of a heat pump, we've not done our jobs properly, in my eyes.
Graham, as somebody up in Scotland, cold, wet, windy Scotland, does insulation play a big role in your decision-making process when you speak to homeowners?
Yeah, I mean, I would always say, like, tackle the easy things. Like, if you've got a suspended floor, like, insulate, upgrade loft insulation. That's your two main heat losses. So if you can improve them, I actually just had my own house done this year. I've been putting it off for about 8 years. So I've done my own house this year, the underfloor. That'll improve it. I mean, losses, about 10 to 15% losses through floor roof. Yeah, that's the two main ones for me. But yeah, insulation is a big part of it. Like Rich was saying earlier on, you don't want to put in too big a heat pump, then insulate, and then how about cycling? Again, if you are going to look at that, look to see if you've got a unit. Just check the actual turn down in the modulation. Like, see if you can get one that will modulate down to 10% as opposed to about 25%.
Danny, you're buzzing and bouncing off the walls today. You're in a passive house, so you've had a big tour there. So you want to tell us about kind of the role that insulation played in that particular property?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am fortunate today that I've got a tour of a passive house development which was focused on going to the EnerFit Plus standard, which will mean that these buildings, or some of them, when they are completed, the renovation and the fabric first approach means that there won't be an energy bill. You'll actually get paid to live in these buildings. That's the goal. These buildings have been built before, and this is the fabric first approach in terms of why are we building buildings that actually need energy right now? Like, we do way more complex things, and it's a bit of an out there approach, but once you look at the physics of it, the simplicity and the brilliant people we have in this country, I don't think it is. To be in a passive house or an EnerFit building is such a pleasure because the air quality is so high, the CO2 is so low on purpose. You know, that's how they were built and designed. So the technology is so important, and I'm happy to speak about my approach and what I've done in my own home because it is technology first. But to be in a place, a retrofitted, barn conversion that was fabric first, the human health, comfort, productivity, I can sit here and say, like, it's an absolute pleasure. But in my own home, as an example, it's better to give your own experiences, I think. I've gone for what I call like a carbon first, fabric forever approach. I moved into a 1960s bungalow, no insulation except a decent bit in the loft. Floor is freezing, walls are freezing, and there was an old gas boiler. I pulled it out straight away to save carbon per year. But also, to Natasha's point earlier on, you said we've not done our jobs correctly. Well, we're working under grants available to us as well. And the grants available favour technology first in the UK, whereas in other countries they favour fabric first. So in the UK, you can get £7,500 off a heat pump, of course. And there's also lending providers that can give you up to £2,000 off just for installing a heat pump. So I got £9,500 off going down a technology first approach. So if you've got people out there considering, I get £9,500 if I do tech first, or I can spend years and years trying to do insulation work. There's a financial and grants challenge that we have to be conscious of here, yeah.
It is interesting because I was looking at what other countries have done because I always find that really interesting. Germany did a bit of research, like in 2021, they spent nearly £3.5 billion on insulation measures, right? And then when they looked at how that had cut their total gas usage as a country, they realised it hadn't at all. Because there's this rebound effect. So people, if your house is, they have it warmer, they whack up the thermostat, they might open a window here and there and, for better air quality. And that is a trend that a lot of research has shown, actually, there's a guy called, what's his name? Michael Barnard, and he's a Canadian guy, and he's talks about this a potential trap of insisting that fabric comes first. Like, I get it, in an ideal world, you know, we would all have time, space and money to do that. In an ideal world, Daniel, we'd all be sitting in our passive house and it would have been built like that. But, you know, when you look at the housing stock that we've got to improve, and that, you know, the goals that, you know, we want to do that, not just that have been set by government, you know, I kind of start to feel that if we push insulation first, it can feel a bit, it would be a trap potentially, but we could force it in.
This isn't just another book about heat pumps. The Ultimate Guide to Heat Pumps brings together the collective voice of over 35 contributors, engineers, designers, troubleshooters, and homeowners with more than 7,500 installations and 585 years of combined experience. It's no-nonsense, practical advice to help you get it done first time. Available now, link in the description.
I was just going to refer to Graham's point, actually, because he said about check the modulation range of the heat pump. So there's a little fundamental problem people don't realise, okay? So if you have a high output heat pump, so say we start off with your 10 kilowatt building to start with, and we put a 10 kilowatt heat pump in there, okay? And then we reduce the energy down to 5 kilowatts through insulation measures. The issue is compressors don't like sitting at minimum for long periods of time, okay? They've got to have the oil pumping around the compressor, okay? And what you'll find they start doing like, it's very similar, on data, it looks very similar to a defrost cycle, but actually what it's doing, it's turning up the compressor hertz of the compressor to actually get the oil pumping around the system. And it doesn't do that when it's range rated correctly. So for instance, if it was a 10 kilowatt unit and it was giving, you know, 8 kilowatts most of the time, 10 kilowatts at peak, they actually don't need to do that because they run correctly. So the issue you actually have is actually costing yourself more on energy over the longer term by actually having oversized heat pumps. So if you can do it, so I totally get the argument, because I've done many specifications. I've worked at Salford University working on, you know, the difference between fabric first and actually whether you know, if you do oversize the heat pump first actually and then add fabric on after, what the effects on both gas boilers and heat pumps are. So I'm in a pretty good place to give my advice, but every case showed that actually there was a worse effect on the appliances, that once you did the fabric second or fifth or wherever you want to do it, that actually there was an effect on it. And actually, if we're looking at the total thing, so every watt's important, right? So the 26 million houses, if all of us save 1 watt, that's 26 million watts, right? Okay, that's pretty much a power station's worth of use, yeah? We all save 1 watt. So every piece of fabric we can put in first is a benefit to everyone, okay? So yes, there are measures, because I mean, the problem is most people do fabric do a fabric upgrade and then don't think about MVHR or how they're actually going to remove the humidity from the rooms now, or how they're going to reduce the carbon dioxide. So any efficiencies you then make, then like Rhiannon said, you go and open a window because you're actually feeling a bit dizzy and not sometimes, you know, CO2 poisoning actually feels like you're not very well, or you get headaches and things like that from actually too much CO2 saturation in buildings. So people do open windows, people do things like that, because you're tackling a measure, but you're not actually going through the full measure that you should do, which is implementation of MVHR or fresh air intakes or whatever that looks like. There's many methods for that, but it's more than just like fabric. It's more than just heat pumps. Like, heat pumps can come in at any time, but there is a disadvantage for that. So as long as you are aware of the disadvantages and you're happy to put up with those, then there's no reason not to do heat pumps first and then fabric second. You can do that, but like I said, you have got to think of the whole picture, because there is always a cause and effect in any scenario. So you just need to be aware of those cause and effects.
In an ideal world, you would insulate first. But for me, actually, a key thing that we haven't talked about is how you have that conversation with the customer. I've seen sales teams where somebody has called up the team and they're saying, oh, I want a heat pump. I know that my house might not be perfect for it. I don't want to do this insulation. And they've just said, sorry, no. And that needs to change in my eyes. We need to be in a position where we are, we've got a workforce that is educated in a way whereby we can understand these challenges and we can talk to the customer about these challenges and say, absolutely, I love that you're thinking about this technology because this is where we're going. Amazing. There's a few different ways we can do this. Ideally, here's your route. But actually, if you need a new boiler today, don't get it. Let's get a heat pump and let's work with you to help you understand how we can best help you. And it's really putting the customer at the heart of that conversation that I've seen businesses trip up on. Because if you just say no, then a customer will talk to their mate and they'll talk to their mate and they'll talk to their mate and they'll say, yeah, I was told I couldn't get one even though I really wanted one. And that customer is gone for 10 years. Their 10 friends, 10 family members, also gone. You know, we're in a world where the media is demonizing everything we're trying to do. You have to have positive conversations with customers and you have to talk to them in a language they understand. And it's that handhold. It can feel a bit tricky, but don't worry, we're going to be there for you and help you figure it all out. Because we understand it can be a bit difficult. And that for me is putting the customer at the heart of that decision-making process and not saying your house has got to be perfect, because it doesn't, right? If your home can be heated by a boiler, it can be heated by a heat pump too. Is a heat source.
Often we talk to people like really very early in their journey when they're still going, what's a heat pump again? So having those conversations, and like Natasha said, are you making any changes in your home? Will you consider this? What's the loft insulation like? Would you consider increasing it? Would you consider cavity wall if it's possible? One of the conversations that I don't tend to have so much anymore, and this has definitely shifted since I think our thinking has shifted, is I don't talk or encourage that much about internal wall insulation anymore or external wall insulation anymore. Those conversations have kind of stopped because in an extreme example, you might spend 20 grand on external wall insulation to bring down your heat loss. But you could spend 5 grand and get another heat pump in Cascade, and it would be able to cover the heat loss. So yes, Richard, it would cost more to run it. It's not the most efficient way of doing it. Your expenditure that everybody worries about how expensive things are, it's kind of a balance, really. And I think when you can start conversations that early in somebody's mental process, I think it's really important.
Graeme, I think what Natasha and Rhiannon have touched on there is something that I think a lot of the industry is moving towards, where, you know, even in the podcast that I had this morning, all of the guys are saying, well, we're just installing things at far higher temperatures. So, you know, we're putting in it at 55 degrees. Where do you sit on that, Graeme?
We always try and design it as low as we can, always have done. Most of our air source are 45 degrees on retrofit. New builds are 40 degrees with radiators. I've even trialled some underfloors at 35 degrees by doing 100 mil centers instead of 150s. For me, it's always been about efficiency, really. But I do think the market is kind of, well, you've just got to look at a couple of the big boys now, Zero Disrupt, and someone else has come out with another one. And I suppose it depends on what the customer really is looking for. For me, with the price of electric the way it is in the UK, you try and get the most efficient system you can, really.
Brilliant point, Graeme, because you mentioned the, price of electricity. But one kind of slightly more controversial, we always talk about energy savings and trying to be an efficiency and stuff like that. I have heard, this is not my thoughts, but I kind of understand where it's going, is if our energy is certainly greener, we're all waiting for it to be cheaper, and that's out of our hands. But we're always talking about trying to be efficient because of the costs. But actually, if we had lower costs, that one's out of our hands. But if our energy is greener, does it actually matter if we're still using more than necessarily we would want to? If our energy is coming from green source, solar's going crazy. Everyone loves solar. And if that if our grid is getting greener and greener and greener, those efficiencies, it might not matter as much. If we've got more people using heat pumps than are using, if the gas is going down, all of a sudden, those efficiencies that we're striving for now because of the world that we live in might become less important.
The person who's most important here is the people who have to commit to the change, that we all work with and work for, essentially. And what they're reading and what they're studying in their choices is what grants are available. I know I've said this before, but there's quite a lot of people from the UK going to Ireland to retire right now because there's €70,000 grants available to flip properties that have been derelict with fabric upgrades, insulation, windows and doors, the whole shebang. It's a massive market in Ireland and they've nailed it over there. So I know quite a few British people who are retiring in Ireland for that very reason. Whereas we're here kind of fluffing around at the bottom with just the technology grant. People are smart. They're out there studying these things. So I think it's our responsibility to bring choices to the people to show, yes, the carbon is so important, but also the rate in return and being respectful to electricity versus gas risk in the future, not being negligent to that. We have to present the best rate of return to people, because carbon is one thing, but actually people are making these choices is this going to pay for itself in my lifetime, my child's lifetime? Whereas to come back to Rhiannon's point about EWI, you could wrap a whole house in external wall insulation. You might only get a 3 or 4% return over time.
Not all heat pump installers are created equal, and you don't want to learn that the hard way. That's why we've put together a network of professionals who actually know what they're doing. Head to the link in the description and find someone you can trust with your system. Graeme, I think insulation takes on kind of many shapes and sizes. So when we moved into our house, the insulation was okay, but we started to discover, we took a thermal imaging camera and we discovered that some of the windows were a little bit leaky in the corners. Lock areas kind of around the locks were a little bit drafty. Is that something that you sometimes have a conversation with your customers and advise them on, just going around the house and trying to plug some of those basic drafts? Because for us, it made a huge difference.
Most windows in the UK, you've got cold bridging around the edge. I mean, you see them when they fit the like double glazing. It's just the PVC right against the timber. No insulation there. You better have like a bit of like expanding foam or something around it, just something to insulate it a bit better. Most of the stuff we're involved in at the moment is like whole house retrofits, like people are renovating a whole house with an extension. That's we've got about 5 or 6 of these on at the moment. A couple of them are ground source and a couple are going air source. Just insulating as best as you can. I mean, it's not always feasible. Depending on what stage you want to go to with the property and how much money you want to invest in it. Windows, doors, anywhere where there's drafts, try to just seal up as much as you can, Mars, yeah.
So Danny, I mean, you said something quite interesting a short while ago in terms of, I'm almost getting the impression you can throw tack at kind of this problem to try and solve a lot of that. So, you put the PV up, you put the battery in, you put the heat pump in, and you just try and almost engineer the insulation deficits out of the equation by just getting the tack to kind of run the house for you.
This is a great conversation, by the way. When you get £9,500 to choose tech ahead of insulation, what are you going to do? You're going to choose tech, right? And you're going to make it work. But what we have a design responsibility to do, whether we're a one-man band or a global company, Graeme and Richard have nailed it. Graeme said, choose manufacturers that can modulate down to different levels so that we can do we can install equipment now that in 10 years will still work very efficiently because it was how it was originally chosen to do so. So extra system volume, kit that modulates very low, like that's our job in my eyes. And if people are studying what to do and they don't know what to do in 5 or 10 years, then it's talk to installers about how are you planning to install this system so that in 10 years' time I won't be shooting myself in the foot. So Richard also said it really well. Designing and engineering is the number one thing we have to do for the people that want heat pumps. That is our job. And there's a lot of so-called innovation happening the last month or two. Irrespective of what innovation looks like to some people, it's our job to do the right thing in design and engineering. That's the way I would look at it. And at the minute, we are financially supported to choose tech over fabric in this country.
Would you agree with that, Rich?
It's a known fact, isn't it? I mean, everyone likes a free lunch, yeah? You make good lunches as well, Mars. Do you know what I mean? So, but yeah, it's one of those where, I mean, I love heat pumps, right? Don't get me wrong, right? I absolutely love heat pumps. Okay. I love all tech. I love gas boilers as well. But the problem is that you just put tech into the hands of people who don't know how to install it correctly. And that, unfortunately, Natasha, that's what's happening with a lot of the eco stuff at the moment. So I did a big piece recently with the National Energy Action at Salford University, and we found massive holes and deficiency in heat pump installations and reduction in COP, specifically on Eco4. And the problem is when you're talking about fuel poverty, actually without batteries, with just, grid usage. I did a presentation. Rhiannon sat on it actually at Installer Show. We actually released some of our research. But the known facts were without some sort of subsidy or reducing the electricity rate, that actually heat pumps don't actually come much more cheaper. And it actually took a lot of work and engineering design to actually get an Eco4 installation back up to a sort of level where it was actually breaking even with gas. I'm running my heat pump because my COP's at 8. I'm actually running my heat pump for less than 1p per kilowatt hour, which, you know, how do you go about sorting things out like that? Because when you're actually getting heat produced for that amount of money, then, you know, that's great, right? That beats the hell out of gas any day, yeah, or oil or whatever the choices might be. Tech's great. Tech, you know, I totally get it. Totally go with it as well. You know, if you've got a grant and you can actually come in for the grant price or not much over the grant price, that's great. But what I'm seeing is £7,000, £10,000 over the price of the grant. That's a lot of boilers you could change in that time. Yeah, do you know what I mean? It's got to be what are we thinking here? Because if it's everything all in just to decarbonise, that's not a great strategy, to be honest, because you'll decarbonise better if you actually go back through all the old gas boiler stock and get them running well first, than actually implementation of heat pumps that don't actually come up to the efficiencies that they should be running. It's going in the right way, but there needs a bit more thought about all the other people who can't necessarily take that step yet to a heat pump, or, you know, not ready maybe mentally at that decision process.
And I think maybe it's more of then not fabric first, fabric fifth, but like fabric conscious, and understanding what's going on with the fabric of an individual's home and having a conversation, which is an informed conversation about the fabric of their own home. We could do this, but we could also do this in, you know, different time frames, different setup.
One thing I wish we could bring in tomorrow, and I know it's a bit of a big step, but the last few months we've been doing air tightness tests on our heat loss calculations, and it's blowing my mind the difference it makes. And I know it's another step and another cost, but it really does have a massive impact on choosing equipment and risk. If we could just introduce air tightness testing as standard, or pulse testing, we could really save a lot of energy and choose smaller equipment as the years go on. We've just done one on a grade 2 listed property, which if you walked up to it, it would look like 1s and 1.5s and 2s and huge amounts of air losses. There's a brilliant guy who's been retrofitting it for years, so actually came out as 0.3. Now, that is a significant difference to walking up to a house. And, you know, years and years ago, I would have walked up and said 16, 17, 18 kilowatts. And it turns out we can put in a single fan, you know, 14 kilowatt unit because of how well the detail is done around this home. So that alone is saving countless energy and reducing risk. And instead of having 2 heat pumps, they can have 1. And it's just a detailed conversation. And for the extra 250 quid or so, that person's saving thousands of pounds immediately. I just think it's a lovely step that we could take first in this journey of getting, you know, more optimal around heat pumps or fabric. It's like, it's just a win-win for everyone. It comes back to engineering and design, like Richard and Graham have pointed out multiple times. I really respect that.
Everyone I speak to who's done any kind of pulse test, it's blown their mind. And I'm wondering if that is going to change, because everyone I speak to thinks that we're overestimating heat loss on houses. A lot of that is to do with air changes. 0.3 is really good. You know, your MCS, they're looking at your kind of 1 for sort of the average. And quite often we'll drop that to 0.7. But going with Natasha's like customer conversations, I always ask someone, is your house drafty? You know, have you got little pockets that you know, in little corners in a room that you know? And then you can gauge that, and you know if it's something you need to sort of look into a little bit more. But again, that's all, you know, starting as early as we can in somebody's journey.
I'll blow your mind on this, right? So if you do a heat loss of Salford University's Energy House 1, okay, using the CIBSE design guide, you'll come up with a figure of about 6.6 kilowatts, okay? When they did a blower door test, and they actually did, it was 3.8 kilowatts. So, and this is a house which is like the smallest end terrace house you can ever, you know, and you're already dropping a couple of kilowatts off it. The worst problem was actually is when we did it designed at 55 degrees, it actually needed an 8 kilowatt unit put in, because the 5 kilowatt unit, if you were doing 6.6 kilowatts, the 5 kilowatt Samsung that we actually used, right, at the time, it wouldn't meet it. So we had to put an 8 in. But the problem is, because then the actual heat loss was actually 3.8 kilowatts, like then the 8 kilowatts is having problems heating that house, you know. So it's a really fine line. But I said, when did I say it, Rhiannon? I think it was a few installer shows ago. I think I actually when I was on the panel stand there, I said, just pay for everyone just to do a heat loss calculation. Yeah, just the government literally pay to have a heat loss calculation, a blower door test. Every single house in the UK would save billions. We would literally save billions going forwards.
It was 2 years ago, Rich. It was 2 years ago because I was wearing my glitter jacket, I remember. Somebody, like, you know, set up a company and everyone's just going around, do it by the street and whatever. You would just, that efficiency and having that information, that really important information, yeah, it'd be brilliant.
If you've got any questions about heat pumps, then you need to join the Renewable Heating Hub forums. You can connect with other homeowners, share experiences, and get advice on heat pumps and renewables. Sign up today and be a part of the conversation. Link in the description. So that brings us to the end of today's episode on fabric, insulation, and heat pump sizing. A huge thank you to Eon Next for supporting this episode, and also to Rhiannon, Natasha, Danny, Richard, and Graham for sharing their insights and experience. If you found this conversation useful, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and visit Renewable Heating Hub for more content like this. Until next time, stay warm, stay green, stay tuned. Goodbye.